Streaming right now.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm just waiting to make sure I'm actually up on the live YouTubes here before we jump in. How's everyone doing today? Oh, I see myself now. Good deal. We'll get started here in just a moment, just making sure that all of our tech pre-checks work and there's no demo fails this time, which is usually a good thing. And we'll go ahead and jump on in. Hello, everyone. Oh, and James, that's actually my dad. He's joining the live stream right now, so that's kind of cool. Hello, Maxim from Russia. How you doing? All right, looking pretty good. I think we're ready to jump on in. So, hello again, everyone. My name is Matt with Linux Academy, and welcome to our second week of doing live Google Cloud hands-on demos. Glad that everyone is here. Just a couple little ground rules in advance, just kind of an FYI, is that number one, there is a little bit of a delay on the stream, about 20 seconds or so. So any interactions with chat's going to be on a little bit of delay, just because of the tech reasons for that. Also, I am hoping this will be an interactive chat, so I'll be looking at my right screen over here at the chat while also looking at my left screen for the demo, and hopefully I can keep those two straight. So if you got questions, if you're not clear on something I'm talking about, or just you only want to say hi or whatever, go ahead and pipe in, and let's get a conversation started. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on in. Hello, Carlos. Thank you for joining. If you were here last week, kind of what we want to do with these live hands-on demos is really two main purposes. Number one is obviously learn how to do something new within Google Cloud, which is why we have the live hands-on demo portion. And the other main theme that I think is at least as important or possibly even more important is to go over the process of, I was asked to use memes to demonstrate this, of how to go from here, wherever you're at in your tech career where you have no idea what you're doing, and eventually get to here where you are a super master of the cloud, Linux, or whatever is your preferred technology focus of choice. And I know for myself, and I know for like a lot of other people, wherever you're at in your career, you want to go from here over to there, and you feel like you're just generally stuck because where you want to get to is just so huge and complex, like the cloud or Linux or DevOps or Kubernetes, which is, incredibly complex by itself, that you just don't know what to do. And you're like, I just don't know where to start or how to take that first step. And something we stress a lot in Linux Academy is we help everyone along that process from, I've been working with Linux for 20 years and I know everything about it, to I know absolutely nothing. Where do I first get started to get from where I'm at now to where it is I want to go? And really kind of the approach that we take both in these hands-on demos and also on Linux Academy itself, if I can steal a quote from Henry Ford, is that any topic, no matter how complex or just ridiculously difficult it is, if you can break it down into simple, small jobs and just start learning on one simple concept and build another on top of that and put another on top of that, eventually, I guess in the Ford example, you build a car. Cars are pretty complex, cloud's pretty complex, Linux is pretty complex, DevOps is pretty complex. Break it down to small pieces, learn it from the beginner level, and then just layer on gradual levels of complexity on top of that. So that's really kind of the main thing we're going to do here. Now, I did mention last week, and we also have in the chat here as well, is that these suggestions for what we cover come from you. In fact, the ones we're doing today, we're going to do two demos, one really pretty basic, and one pretty complex. These came from comments in last week's chat. So if you have a topic you want to see demonstrated next week, I highly encourage you to go ahead and put it in the chat. Hey, let's cover this. There is a little bit of caveat we want to cover. The main purposes of these demos really want to be on a beginner to intermediate level, and also something we could demonstrate in about a 45-minute time span. Some of the suggestions were really good last week. However, some of them are also just way too complex and advanced, especially for someone watching from a beginner level. So what I'd like to encourage you is, especially if you are an expert in Google Cloud or something else, If there's a topic that you got hung up on along your journey of getting from where you're at right now, that you think that someone else could use maybe just like a real simplified explanation for the little roadblock you were dealing with back when you were at that point, those are really the kind of topics that we want to go for. Again, something we can demonstrate in about a 45-minute period and kind of help people in different areas of their tech journey. Cool? Cool. Okay, so with that out of the way, hello to everyone joining us just now. We're going to go ahead and jump into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do 2 hands-on demonstrations today. One of them is going to be pretty simple that we can do in a couple minutes. And the other one is that it's one I would consider to be a little bit on the complex end for what we want to do in the demos. But the reason we're doing it is that I think it's the process of learning it is going to be a really good demonstration of how to take a really complex topic, in this case, Kubernetes Engine load balancing, and going from not knowing how to do it to knowing how to doing it, and the process, at least I took, I've had to get from here to there. Now, here's an actual admission on my part. I'm actually not a Kubernetes master. I come from more of more of an ops sysadmin networking background. Some of our other team members, like Ben Lambert, who's working on the cloud engineer course right now, he knows a lot more about Kubernetes than I do. So when I saw this suggestion, I was pretty familiar with load balancing on Google Cloud. I was somewhat familiar, at least with some of the basics of Kubernetes Engine, but I had never actually done load balancing on Google Kubernetes Engine before this demo today. So I actually had to learn this myself before I could actually demonstrate it for you today. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the process of what I had to do to learn how to demo this and kind of go through kind of a step-by-step, how do I get from here over to there for myself? And hopefully I can share that with you and kind of take the pretty complex topic of load balancing on GKE and breaking it down to simple pieces and getting from here over to there. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in. The 2 suggestions we had is, number 1, obviously the load balancing on GKE. I also want to do a little bit more simple one to get it out of the way first, just because we had a request for it. And I think it's just a really good, quick, bite-sized piece to jump into to show how to look up the answer. And I forget the name, forgive me, but someone asked last week, can you create a project on Google Cloud using command line? Yes, you can. I didn't remember the exact command, so I had to actually look it up myself. So I'm going to actually expand my Cloud Shell here. And to learn how do I create a project using gcloud commands, using the Google Cloud SDK on Google Cloud, I just typed in gcloud, which is the command line reference for working with Google Cloud in command line, and then create project. So, okay, I know we can do it through the command line. How do we do that? First result, gcloud projects create. And here's our point of reference for how we create project with command line if we didn't know it in the first place. It gives a synopsis, gives a syntax, gives alternate flags. And it looks like the syntax is you type in gcloud projects create, whatever your globally unique project ID is going to be. And I think the only other tag I'd really be interested in is giving it a friendly name as well. So we would use this name field here. Let's just go ahead and take this reference and go ahead and test it out. So I'm going to type in gcloud projects create. Now, it has to be a globally unique project ID. And unlike the web console, you don't get immediate feedback whether it is unique or not. So I'm just going to just make a pretty complex one that should work. I'm just going to do some random numbers after it. And I want to give it a friendly name. So let's just go 2 dashes, name equals name, probably in quotes there. What was that? It was name in caps. It is not in caps. And we'll just say test project. And this will take just a moment to create. There'll be a little bit of a delay while we're waiting for it to be up and running. And then when it's done, we will test out to see if it actually accomplished successfully. All right, looks like the project has been created. Let's go to our projects list. We will go to all, and we have our test project with the project name, PW demo test, and just whatever numbers I put on after that. So to create a project from command line, doing a Google search for gcloud projects create, it drops you into your gcloud reference page on Google Cloud's documentation. Fortunately, the first result brought you directly to where we wanted to go. The syntax is typing in gcloud projects create, typing in a globally unique project ID, got some alternate tags. The one we cared about was doing a friendly name tag, and there you go. So that is our simple demo. If you have any questions on that, let me know. Otherwise, we will move on to the next one. There's a delay again. By the way, welcome to everyone joining right now. We have people joining from all over the world. It's pretty cool, actually. From looks like Russia, India, Angola, and Germany so far. So, hey, cool stuff. I wonder what time it is where you're at right now, and if you're not asleep right now. Let's go ahead and jump into our more complex demo. And this is really going to be kind of the big one for today, in which, again, I didn't get the name. I could probably go over the previous live demo recording, but someone recommended that they would love to see a demo of how to do load balancing on Google Kubernetes Engine. Now, like I said before, this is kind of on the more complex end of what we want to do for demonstrations, just because of the format, kind of the time constraints we're working with. But I really kind of latched onto this because before yesterday, I didn't know how to do load balancing on Google Kubernetes Engine. I've done load balancing before, primarily with managed instance group within Google Cloud on Compute Engine, but Kubernetes Engine is a completely different animal. So I actually had to learn this myself. There is a good quote from our CEO, which is going to sound kind of cheesy, but it's very true. If I bring it up, he put on Twitter one time, everyone wants to be an expert, but recognizing you don't know absolutely everything isn't a sign of weakness, a sign of strength. Kubernetes isn't really my strong suit, so this is something I actually had to learn so I could demonstrate it, and I actually want to, number one, demonstrate it, and then number two, show how I learned it step by step so you'll be able to play along with it as well. So let's go back to our Henry Ford quote, and we're going to break this pretty complex topic down into some much smaller pieces and then get to our reference. So what I want to do is just kind of first talk about what is load balancing completely apart from the Kubernetes aspect. We're going to kind of break it up into two pieces, load balancing, and then go into the Kubernetes side of it. And if you come from a network background, you should be familiar with what a load balancer is. If not, this is going to be kind of your, basic in a nutshell explanation. So load balancing is what makes things such as distributed computing, horizontal scalability, and being able to access the same website from anywhere in the world, all that's really made possible via load balancers. And kind of the very simple definition of what a load balancer does is that it acts as a single front entry point for a larger pool of individual servers on the back end. So what we mean by that is that if you have a website called mywebsite.com, and we just made up a fake external IP address here, and if you want to be able to scale this website up and down so it can grow in capacity when there's high demand and shrink in capacity when there's less demand, and you also want it to be available with good performance all the way around the world, you're not going to have a single server, in a single location handling all those requests. What you're going to do, though, is you're going to have different pools of servers that you can either add to or take away from, and maybe other ones in different locations of the world. So if someone goes to mywebsite.com with this IP address, that load balancer is actually going to distribute requests to that website to one of any number of a large pool of different machines in different parts of the world. And each of these machines have its own IP address, but people aren't going to be going to each individual IP address by itself. They go to mywebsite.com, and the load balancer will balance that load both by capacity and also by geographical location, saying, okay, you're going to get this request, you're going to get this request. Someone from Japan is accessing the website, so I'm going to send it to this computer on our Japan region on that request, and so on and so forth. It's balancing the load by geography and capacity. So you don't have just an individual machine serving requests, but you have a pool of machines. And that load balancer is just saying, you get this request, you get this request, you get that request as a single entry point everyone goes into. So that's load balancing in a kind of a complex nutshell, basically balancing the load for distribution to a large pool of machines. Now, on the Google Cloud side, or just kind of for our demo, what we care about is that there are two main types of load balancing available on Google Cloud. Now, there's more than two, but the two we really care about is an HTTP load balancer or a network load balancer, which deals with all TCP and UDP traffic. Now I'm going to start talking about kind of networking terms here. Again, that's kind of my background, but if I lose you on like what layer 3, layer 7 is, go ahead and pipe up in chat, and I'll go ahead and try to explain that a little bit better. On Google Cloud, just kind of in general, the two load balancers we care about is an HTTP load balancer, which is global in scope, which means that you can have a single load balancer, which can serve traffic to Southeast Asia region, US Central, different regions all around the globe. And we have a network load balancer, which operates on layer 3 of the OSI model, if you're familiar with that. And those are regional only. So say if you have a load balancer in the US Central region, a network load balancer can only serve that region, but doesn't serve traffic to another region somewhere else in the world. And you can get a little bit more complex. You can have an HTTP load balancer distributing traffic to multiple regional load balancers, but that's a little bit beyond the scope of this conversation. Is everyone clear on layer 7, layer 3, HTTP? If you're confused, let me know in chat, and I'd love to break that down. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and move on from that point. Yes, Crisis, we do have our Google Cloud Essentials, and also I would say the Cloud Architect Part 2 course goes into a lot more detail about how load balancing on Google Cloud works, especially the breakdown between network and HTTP load balancers. So excellent question on that. If you're a Linux Academy subscriber, we do go into a lot more detail on that particular topic across a couple of our courses. Thank you for that question. So finishing up with load balancers, distributes load, and that's really apart from Kubernetes Engine. Now, when we start getting into the Kubernetes Engine side of things, things get a little bit more complex, which is what we're going to actually jump into the demonstration from here. So I'm going to come back to here in a few minutes, but the basic procedure of using load balancing on Kubernetes Engine, again, break everything down into smaller pieces. It's really 4 main basic steps. You have to create your Kubernetes cluster. You have to deploy your application to the cluster. Step 3 is you have to expose your application as an external service. And depending on if you're doing network or HTTP load balancing, the steps may be a little bit different, which we'll show in just a second. And then the last step, if you're using the global HTTP load balancing option, you have to use what's called an Ingress extension to configure load balancing on Google Cloud. If it sounds Greek to you, that's fine. We're going to go into more detail here in just a second. But that's going to be the basic 4-step process of doing load balancing with Kubernetes Engine on Google Cloud. Cool. Let's go and jump on in. So like I said before yesterday, I actually did not know how to do this. So I had to go learn it so I could actually get the steps together in some sort of a fashion so I could demonstrate it for you today. So what I'm going to start off with, I'm going to actually show you what I did to go from, I know a bit about load balancers and Kubernetes Engine to what we're doing here, kind of on a step-by-step process. And we may kind of abridge some of the steps so we're not going 2 hours today. So what I did was, okay, I need to know about load balancing on GKE. In Google, I just typed in GKE load balancer. And believe it or not, this actually gave me all the resources I needed to, at least at a basic beginner level, be able to do this task. So if we type in GKE load balancer, we have an ad up top, of course. We have a couple links to Google Cloud's documentation about how to do HTTP load balancing and also how to do internal load balancing. And we also have a link a little bit further down, a resource that I'm a big fan of called Code Labs that kind of gives a step-by-step process of how to set it up as well. I'm going to cancel that. So here's what we're going to do for our actual demo, in which this is actually done by Google. It's free to everyone. It's called Google Developer Code Labs. Well, they'll just give different types of exercises for how to do some sort of a task. So not knowing how to do GKE load balancing, I came to here and I went through a step-by-step process of an explanation about what load balancing does, the difference between network and HTTP load balancing, and preparing and getting everything set up with that. Now, if we quickly go through some of these steps, we'll look at each one in more detail here in a few minutes, but it has a preparation phase and command lines for creating a Kubernetes cluster. We're going to be deploying Nginx in Kubernetes. It's going to be for the network load balancer and our different steps on here. And what I did is I went through all of this in a TextPad document. I copied all of the commands with what they did step by step in this document here. Now, if you were here last week, does this seem kind of familiar to what we did last week when we did an introduction to scripting with Google Cloud from the perspective of someone who didn't know how to do scripting? It's really kind of the same process in which, okay, I took the steps here, I copied in all the commands with a little note about what each one does. And after going through everything, I have the entire process of creating both a network and HTTP load balancer within this document. There's my process right there that I can cross-reference along here, going step by step as well. That's part of the whole learning how to learn process. So in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of abridge some of these steps, but if you just do a search for GKE load balancer, this link will be available to you as well. What we're going to do, let me go ahead and go to a split side-by-side screen view, so this will be a little bit easier to follow along. I'm going to kick out my Cloud Shell to a new tab. I am now going to go through the step-by-step process of creating both a network and an HTTP load balancer on Google Kubernetes Engine from the perspective of someone who has never actually done it before. So brief overview of load balancing on GKE. Here's kind of the main basic steps that we talked about in our Lucid chart. You need to create the cluster, deploy the application, expose it as a service, and then depending if you're doing HTTP load balancing, do the Ingress extension from there. So first we're going to prepare. And where did my text document go? Bear with me. I'm looking for my document. There we go. There we go. First, we're going to prepare. We're going to set some of our variables, and that we need to set a default project ID, our default region, and our default zone. And that will create our default variable, so we don't have to supply the US Central region or zone every single time we do that. I'm just going to copy and paste into there. So that's doing some of our initial setup. Okay, so we're prepared. We have our project ID set. We have our default zone set. We have our default region set. So anytime we do any other commands, it's going to default to those. Makes the process just a little bit easier. Let's go along to the next step. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a Kubernetes cluster for network load balancing, which is layer 3 and regional only. So what we're going to do is we're going to first create our Kubernetes cluster. And again, I already have these copy and pasted into a text document, but we'll just straight up copy and paste from here. We're going to create a new cluster on Kubernetes Engine using 3 nodes. Now, this is going to take a few minutes to complete, so there's really not much to do else here in the meantime, except chat, I suppose. But what we're going to do after that, just to kind of preview everything, is we're going to next go to our next step here, which is deploying our very simple Nginx web application. Just going to say, welcome to Nginx, nothing really too complex there. And then we're going to expose that application as a service, which will set up internal load balancing, or rather network load balancing, the layer 3 version, and we'll see if that works. So it's going to take about a couple minutes to deploy, which is fairly typical for it. I know I did pretty much a data dump of information already there. And like I said, there's a little bit more on the complex end of what we wanted to do. We're just trying to keep it under time. Does anyone have any questions about what I've talked about so far, or something that you want me to expound upon a little bit more as we're waiting for our cluster to get up and running? This would probably be a good time to go ahead and cover that real quick. Also, can everyone see the screen, by the way? We had some comments last time about how the text was too small, so I bumped up the font size a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to see. Okay, still waiting for Kimberly. The 2 main points we're going to be just kind of sitting around waiting is, number 1, deploying our clusters, which you're going to do twice here, and also when we're setting up our HTTP load balancer. So just kind of so you know in advance, there is going to be a little bit of a waiting period where we just got to wait for that to deploy, which is great times for asking questions. Okay, how about as we're waiting, what kind of topics do you want to see next week from the perspective of maybe beginner to intermediate level that you want to see me demo next week, go ahead and put those in chat as well. Okay, looks like our cluster is up and working. If we go over to our web console and go to Kubernetes Engine, we have our network LB, which is the name of our cluster, by the way, sitting right there. Excellent. So our cluster is up and running. Let's go to our break it down to basic steps. Create the cluster. Next, we want to deploy the application, which is what we're doing on this step right here. Now, there's a couple different ways we can do this, depending on what source you're looking at. The Colabs just has us run a basic Nginx application directly from our cluster. If you go into the Google Cloud documentation, which is one of the links on the previous page, as far as how to do that, they will actually pull from a public container registry, a very basic Hello World app. The end result's pretty much the same. But in our case, we are going to next deploy our application, which is going to be Nginx. We're just going to go ahead and copy and paste it into our Cloud Shell. It's going to create 3 replicas, one for each one of our nodes. And that should complete fairly quickly. I'm seeing a vote for Kubernetes. That's pretty good. I think we'll do some more Kubernetes stuff here in the future. It seems to be very, very popular these days. Okay, our application is deployed. We can get the status of our pods. This doesn't actually do anything. It just checks our current status about everything we are running. Let me clear that. We have our 3 pods up and running. Each individual pod has its own internal IP address. That's great. Nginx pod is now running on a different node or a different virtual machine. So great. Next, let's go on to our step 3 for our network load balancer. Now that we deployed the application, let's expose the application as an external service. This is where the load balancing part takes place within the context of using Kubernetes. Also, a little bit of a side note, you're seeing that I'm using some commands with a kubectl in front of it. This is actually a Kubernetes-specific command. I'm pretty sure it's short for Kubernetes control. Ben, if you're on, let me know if I am incorrect on that. But basically, these are the commands we're using through the Google Cloud SDK to run Kubernetes commands, not so much Google Cloud commands. So all of our load balancing setup is going to be done within the context of Kubernetes, not so much just Google Cloud itself. So we're going to expose, step 3, expose this Nginx cluster as a service. And as part of the network load balancing, we're also going to set it up as a load balancer as well. So we'll just copy and paste this right into here. That's a pretty quick process. And then we need to get the IP address for our load balancer, which is, again, the external point of entry, which will be sending traffic to each 3 of our pods here. We have our cluster IP. Again, this is our single front-facing entry for a pool of Kubernetes machines on the back end. I'm just going to do that. And we will just copy and paste into a new web browser. It may take a moment for the load balancer to be up and running, so there may be another awkward pause while we're waiting for it to still initialize. Did it say it was ready to go? We'll give that another minute. Sometimes the load balancer does take a couple minutes to fully initialize, so we just have to wait. Do you have a chance to work on EKS node scaling with Terraform? I have not done that yet. I've gotten a couple requests of working with Terraform. I will put that on the list, though. Thank you very much for that, D. Okay, let's go ahead and see if that load balancer is up and working yet. It's still not. May have to wait just a little bit longer, making sure I did not skip a step here. See, we deployed our application. Yep, that was it. Pressing you just wait a little bit longer. Was I doing the cluster IP? Oh, you know what? I was using the internal IP. So demo file on my part, learning experience. There we go. Helps if I use the correct external IP address. Okay, so very basic. Welcome to Engine next page. So this external IP address is the load balancer IP address. So again, right here, that's acting as the single front-facing point of entry for our pool of Kubernetes machine pods sitting on the back end. And one of those three pods, which one it is, doesn't really matter, is giving us a basic welcome to Engine next page. So that is our network load balancer up and running. So let's go ahead and move on now to the HTTP load balancer. And as far as what's the difference between an HTTP load balancer and a network load balancer in the context of Kubernetes Engine, a good explanation is in the Google Cloud documentation again. Basically, the one we just did, which is the network or TCP UDP versions, it does not terminate HTTP traffic and there's no health checks in it. So for serving a website, you're better off typically doing the HTTPS load balancer, which we're about to demonstrate here in just a moment. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into that and go through the step-by-step process. First, we are going to tear down our existing cluster. Now I have the teardown commands off to the side here. There'll be just a little bit of waiting as those shut down. Give me just one moment. Okay, and let's go ahead and start tearing down the previous Kubernetes cluster itself. And we can go ahead and move on while that's working in the background. So, okay, so we just went step by step, break it down to small pieces, how to deploy a cluster, deploy Nginx, just a simple web application, to the cluster, and then how to create a layer 3 network load balancer by exposing as a service, going step by step from here. Let's do the same thing now using an HTTP load balancer, which is layer 7. Global traffic can serve multiple global regions all around Google Cloud. Mostly the same steps, couple main differences more toward the end of the demonstration though. So we're now going to create a Kubernetes load balancer or create a Kubernetes cluster for load balancing. So we need to, again, first create the initial Kubernetes cluster itself. And if I can just straight copy and paste this line here. We preset our variables at the beginning. Actually, I think I did. Give me 1 second. I've had a slight demo failure. Let me fix that real quick. We need to make sure we set our default variables we're going to be using. Okay, we're good on that. We just separate type for now. So we are going to create a new cluster, start from scratch. And this is, again, going to take about 2 or 3 minutes to go ahead and spin all the way up and running. We're just creating a new cluster that we named HTTP load balancer from our variables list at the beginning that we're going to demonstrate setting up the layer 7 load balancing on. This is going to take a few minutes again. How's everything going so far? So that's still kind of experimental for us, how we're doing these hands-on demos. Do you feel this is kind of like right in line with what you're wanting to learn, maybe a little bit more on the complex side? Also, what are some other ideas that you want to see next week as well while we are waiting? Prashant, this particular lesson we don't yet have on Lens Academy course. We are in the process of refreshing our Kubernetes Engine deep dive course on our Google Cloud content that Joseph Lowry is currently working on. This may be a good idea for him to cover. You know what? If he's not watching, I'll make sure that just to see if he has it on his list so we can go ahead and cover that, and we can go into a lot more detail on that as well. So thank you for bringing that up, Prashant. We don't have it yet, but we're actually working on that as we speak. Seeing what time it is where everyone's at. So 9:11 p.m. in India, 5:30 p.m. in Germany. Wow, 9/11, that's some dedication there. Thank you for joining from India. Okay, looks like our cluster is up and working. So we're going to go ahead and move along here. So we create our cluster. Again, we're going to do the same process here, broken down into smaller steps. We're going to create our cluster. We're going to deploy the same Nginx application. We're going to expose that application as an external service, which is all going to be on our steps 8 and 9 here. And for HTTP load balancing, there's a little bit of an extra step in that instead of using the service exposure portion as load balancing, it's going to be separate. And we have to do what's called an Ingress extension, which is a Kubernetes specific thing, not really a Google Cloud thing, to set up a Google Cloud HTTP load balancer. Kind of complex. We'll break it down here in just a moment. So let's jump on in. Let's see here. So where was I? Yes. Okay. So we created our Kubernetes cluster. Let's make sure it is up and running. HTTP load balancer looks pretty good to me. Let's go to create and expose the service. We are going to, this should be the exact same step as in 5. Kube control, run Nginx. Yep, almost exactly the same. We're not specifying our number of replicas this time, but pretty close. So we're deploying Nginx, and that may take just a moment. And again, I did it in advance, but what I recommend is if you're doing this yourself in a similar exercise, take all these steps, stick them into a TextPad document, file it away somewhere in some sort of, note-keeping application. There's a whole bunch of different ones out there, and save this as a reference for how to do step-by-step, along with notes of, what the heck you're doing. And you can even create scripts out of this. I actually did create a few scripts for this in advance, where this entire process, I could create our network load balancer from start to finish, shut it down, create our HTTP load balancer, shut it down, all from our step-by-step process, copied into a TextPad document, and then broken up into individual script files depending on what I'm doing. So we're creating scripts out of our step-by-step hands-on demo, one thing leading to the other, getting from here over to there. Cool. Okay, so our deployment Nginx has been created. Let's see, we did that. We need to next create a container service to expose it. So we went from, again, creating a cluster, deploying our application. This is our step right here. We need to expose the application as an external service. This is this step right here. Again, these are all done via Kubernetes commands. So this is actually apart from Google Cloud, but we're working with Kubernetes within Google Cloud, just to make sure that everyone is aware of that. All right, that's a pretty quick process. Expose the service. The last step, which is new to our HTTP load balancing, is that we need to create an Ingress object. What is an Ingress object? Now, what's funny to me is, again, since I don't have a rich Kubernetes background, my previous exposure to Ingress was dealing with firewall traffic. So Ingress is incoming traffic. So I'm like, okay, is it incoming traffic? But no, it's actually quite a bit different. So what an Ingress object does, there's a pretty good explanation here. It's an extension that's unique to specifically Kubernetes. So, helps if you know a bit about Kubernetes to really grasp it. That gives rules for routing external traffic to Kubernetes endpoints. It sounds kind of like a load balancer to me. On Container Engine, that's a little bit out of date. It's Kubernetes Engine now. We will be using a Kubernetes command to set up a Google Cloud HTTP load balancer, which is what we're doing here. And I think if we go to our, get out of the way, little banner there, previous Google results, and go to our documentation, it talks about what an ingress is here in a little bit more detail. If I can find the explanation for this, a little bit of a bonus, but just kind of give some more background info. Yep, also talks about how ingress, and it gives a link there. If we go to a new tab, this goes straight into the documentation for Kubernetes, and it says what ingress is. There's a whole deep dive into that that gives you a lot more detail than what we have here, but this is just enough information to at least get it set up and get yourself basically familiar with it. But that's kind of the more deep dive of what ingress is. So a little squirrel moment there. So we next need to create an extension via a YAML file that'll be incorporated into our Kubernetes cluster to set up the Google Cloud Load Balancer. Cool. So multi-step process. Step one is that we need to create a .yaml extension file. And this file we're creating is what's going to be used for setting up the actual Google Cloud Load Balancer itself. The syntax here is going to specify an API version. This is going to be our extension type. This is what we're going to basically be naming our load balancer. And our backend is going to be Nginx, port 80, pretty much everything else we just set up in the previous step. A couple different ways you can do this. You can open up your favorite text editor for Linux. I'm just going to use Vim. And let's see, we're just going to go ahead and call this basic ingress.yaml. We're going to insert, copy, paste, and get out. If we check our directory, we have our basic ingress YAML file. We'll double check it. And there's everything here. We have everything there. Pretty simple. Okay, we have our YAML file, which is going to be the configuration file used to create our Google Cloud Load Balancer. That's just an example. We can ignore that. Next, we're going to execute creating the ingress or the extension from the YAML file to create our actual load balancer itself. So again, copy paste using a Kubernetes specific command. We're going to create an extension and we're going to be pointing to our configuration file that we just made. That's going to complete right away. However, there's going to be another wait a few minutes for it to be up and running. So we are now creating our load balancer on Google Cloud. If we go over to our web console and scroll down to network services, look at our load balancing on here. This is in the process of getting up and running. Now, this is not going to actually be able to serve traffic for, gosh, I think in my experience about, it's still up, it's still configuring right now. It's about 3 to 5 minutes before we can actually test it out. So a little bit more awkward waiting purely in the background. Let's go ahead and move a little bit ahead in the meantime, though. So it's in the process of creating a load balancer, connecting to our back end of our pool of machines. So this pool of machines here, but on Kubernetes Engine, and it's establishing those back-end connections, setting up health checks, all that good stuff you get with a typical HTTP load balancer to make sure everything, is up and running and healthy and all that good stuff. There's going to be kind of periodic checking here, but you can check the progress of what's going on in the background. We can check on the status of the service, which isn't entirely accurate because if we try to get on, if it's not up and running yet, it still won't be working. So if we try to use this external IP address now, this will likely not work. Yeah, it's not ready. We just got to keep on waiting. And then we can also collect information from our external load balancer IP address using this command as well. We're going to get our ingress for the basic ingress. So once it's up and running, this is going to be our front-facing external load balancer IP address that serves traffic to each one of our 3 Kubernetes Engine cluster nodes, which if we try it again, it's probably still not working. Nope, so we just got to wait. So this takes, again, about 3 to 5 minutes. So we have a few minutes here, nothing else to demonstrate until it's up and running. Really enjoying some of the chat here so far. Let's see, make sure I didn't miss anything here, trying to multitask. Yeah, we are working on a Kubernetes Engine deep dive that I'm sure we'll be covering load balancing. If not, I'll make sure that we do get it covered. The other thing I want to stress is, again, I'm actually not a Kubernetes master. We have other people on our team a lot more knowledgeable about specifically Kubernetes than me. But I was able to put this demo together pretty much in the course of a day by Googling it, looking at the Google Cloud documentation, looking at the code labs, and then going through the process. So you're not going to be an expert in Kubernetes Engine load balancing just by going through this, especially if you have no previous experience. But by going through this, you are at least getting familiar, even if it's just going through the motions, you're getting more familiar with the process of doing that. So you're going from knowing nothing to at least now I have a beginner's understanding of the basic steps of creating a load balancer on Kubernetes Engine. And that could be, that can apply to anything on Google Cloud, Linux, DevOps, whatever. The main way to learn something is just jump in. In the tutorials where you're going through the motions, even if you don't fully understand each and every one of the steps, go through the motions, get familiar, do hands-on, make scripts out of stuff, copy and paste and write down steps here. Try little modifications where you may tweak something, you may get an error message, that's okay. You may just completely break something, that's okay as well. But that's how you get from not knowing something to knowing something. You just got to jump in, try it out, get familiar, and just start playing with it. And the more you work with it, you can start eventually layering on higher and higher levels of complexity until at some point you are some sort of a cat cloud expert. Pretty cool, right? Let's see. Some other questions here. Is it possible to do content or on host-based routing via GCP load balancer? That is a good question. I think that could actually work within the context of a hands-on demo. So yes, probably on that. Also, Prabhakar, I'm sorry if I'm messing your name up. Can a Google Cloud Load Balancer layer 7 or layer 3 do round robin between regions or just between zones? Between regions or between zones? I'm trying to... Let me think about that for a second. What do you mean by round robin? Do you mean like going forwards and backwards? I'm not quite sure what you're asking with that. And again, there's a stream delay, so I'm getting this late. While I'm waiting on that, let's see if our load balancer is up and working yet. We may get a different error message in the meantime before it's done. Okay, that's still typical. It means that it's still got to wait about another minute or two, and we'll get the actual Nginx screen. So we'll just keep waiting on that. You know what, Prabhakar? I'm not 100% certain on that. Let's do this. I actually want to find this out and get back to you on it. I have an idea, but I'm not. So evenly distributing traffic. I'm trying to. I know as far as evenly distributing traffic, the load balancer would be the one that's distributing traffic between regions and zones. And I know the load balancer itself also gets feedback via health checks and also checking capacity if it needs to reroute load over to other individual backends or pods or whatever. Is that kind of what you're asking, or am I still off base? Actually, I think I understand what you're saying. Let me know if I'm completely off on this. So if a load balancer is serving multiple zones, it's going to, or just regions, it's going to do its balancing based on whatever you have it set to. So if you have, let's just say a network load balancer that's serving a single region, but across like 3 or 4 different zones, it's going to distribute that traffic among each zone based on just whatever load it needs to be. And I think that applies to an HTTP load balancer as well. If you're doing different instance groups, whether in regions or zones, or maybe even mixtures as such, it should be pretty much the same topic. I may need to double check that and get back to you. Prompt card, if you don't mind, maybe private messaging, which I think you can, your email address. I'd love to get the specifics on that just to make sure that I'm answering your question correctly and get you a more exact answer on that. Actually, you know what? If you want to email me directly, I'm going to open myself up to spam here. I am typing in my email here. Email me at that email address, and I can double check on that and get back to you. Cool, and I got your email as well. Awesome, thank you. I'll double check that for you. Good question. I also want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're asking, because I might be a little bit lost in the sauce as well. Okay, let's see if this is completed yet. All right, still waiting. The first time I practiced this, I kept panicking, thinking I did something wrong, and it's like, no, I just had to keep on waiting, and that load balancer would be up and running. So we just need to be patient. Actually, if you don't mind, either while we're waiting here awkwardly or until then, afterwards, go ahead and shoot me an email, kind of like a maybe more of a breakdown of what you're asking, and I can get back to you with that. Keep saying we have no front end configured. I don't think we missed a step here. Maybe it just wasn't refreshing correctly. Okay, that looks better there. Are we done yet? Hey, there we go. All right. That was about 5-6 minutes. Wow. Anyway, so our global HTTP load balancer is now complete by typing in that external IP address, which we get from our Kubernetes, basically get ingress info. We now have our HTTP load balancer complete with health checks, HTTP termination, etc. Now serving traffic to each one of our 3 backend nodes, and we have a web page being served from there. And that's really about the end of the demo. So just kind of wrap up what we did. I went from not really knowing about it to just doing a Google search for GKE load balancing, which gave me a variety of sources, one of them being this Colabs page here. I copied and pasted each one of these steps into a text document with a little # comment field of what that thing actually does. And I even broke it out into some extra scripts that we could use to, shortcut some of that process as well, which won't make me an expert or anyone else an expert, but it gives you the basic familiarity of how to create a load balancer, which you can then take that basic understanding. And then if you're going to dive into it further, do some, higher and higher levels of complexity until eventually you're the cat in the cloud and all that good stuff. And yeah, cool. And that really wraps up my demo. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, we're going to be doing this every Thursday at, this week we did at 10:30 a.m. So I think we're still setting on a set time we did at 10 a.m. the week before. Let me know in chat some of the ideas you'd want to see for demonstrations over the next couple weeks. There are some really good suggestions already, but we definitely encourage any others. Hey, how do I do this? I've always been wondering about it. Let us know. Also, if you like this content, we also have weekly Google Cloud updates about what's new in Google Cloud, kind of like a weekly vlogcast on Wednesdays. So if you like this stuff, go ahead and hit the subscribe button. The true YouTube vlogger. I feel dorky whenever I say that, but hit the go ahead and subscribe. And we're putting out new content like this all the time. Also, if you are a Linux Academy subscriber, we have a ton more content like this on Google Cloud, and also all the cloud, all the Linux, all the DevOps things for anywhere from an absolute beginner. I think I've used computer once or twice to bring on the crazy hard certification exams and everywhere in between. So wherever you're at in your Linux cloud or DevOps journey, we can help you get to where you want to be. So yeah, definitely check it out. I have run out of stuff to talk about. If you have any questions, let me know. I think we'll leave the chat up for a few more minutes. Jacob, hopefully you can clarify that. And with that, let me know if you have any questions, and thank you for joining.